Hello, you fantastic little marketing bees. You're tuned into episode 41 of the Marketing Buzzword Podcast.
This is the Marketing Buzzword Podcast, the podcast where we dissect the world's most common marketing buzzwords. Hold on tight. We are about to fly around the beehive to see the latest buzzwords that stuck to the marketing bees.
Hello again, and welcome back to the Marketing Buzzword Podcast. This is the podcast which helps you to understand what all these business and marketing buzzwords actually mean and how they can be helpful going forward. I'm your host, Ben Roberts, and in these shows, I am the marketing bee in charge of making sure I can get on the right guest and ask the right questions to make sure these words and phrases actually make sense. And in today's show, we're going to sort of make sense of the buzzword, the term GDPR. Oh, I know, 4 horrible letters. And we're going to look at actually how that really helps with a data-centric approach to marketing and actually sort of what the term GDPR really means for marketers and how businesses can benefit from it, really. And before we do so, I need to tell you this podcast is powered by Talkative. Talkative is a company that brings together live web chat, voice calls, video calls, and co-browsing together in one package. Embedded into your website, which is 3 lines of code, you can transform your customer journey and your customer experience. It basically allows your customers to contact you directly through your website, so they don't even have to leave your website to get instant responses from your company. Find out more at talkative.uk. Also, we're in the middle of the crowdfunding campaign at the moment for the book, which is spins off the podcast, Marketing Buzzword to Marketing Authority. I'd absolutely love it if you're listening to this episode and you think, "Ooh, this sounds interesting," please check out the Publishizer crowdfunding page. Just type in Marketing Buzzword to Marketing Authority on Google, take a look at the show notes, go on the Marketing Buzzword website, whatever it is, you can find out so many places on my social media feeds. And I would love to share more about the book, why I'm writing it, and there's loads of information on the crowdfunding page. But please, honestly, if everyone who's listening just orders 1 copy each, absolutely smash the crowdfunding target. So if you are listening, please just have a look. 1 copy, that's all I'm asking. 1 copy. If everyone does that, we'll literally absolutely smash the 250 book target. So please check it out and have a look at all the links. And if one final thing, if you are loving the show, please also do leave a review on iTunes. But I'm not going to bang on about that this month because I really want sort of more crowdfunding support for the book. Anyway, that's more enough about me and sort of the makeup of the show. Time to introduce this week's guest. And this week's expert buzzword bee is a guy called Chris Roberts. Now, Chris co-founded the GDPR Alliance in 2017, to help businesses access the very best expertise as they move towards GDPR compliance. The Alliance includes experts in legal, IT, web, shredding, auditing, process engineering, and training. And the Alliance is supporting clients across a wide number of sectors, including sport, care, education, construction, transport, and health. Now, Chris regularly presents on a range of topics including digital transformation, trust, data protection and privacy, and he's also a board member of the Wales Fraud Forum. He has broad experience gained in the world of work through telecoms, IT, high technology and general business sectors. He started his career at BT just as digitization began and has held engineering, consulting, sales and marketing and partnership roles in globally leading sector companies including Newbridge Networks and Kronos Technologies. Really cool guy. Honestly, the amount of knowledge embedded into this episode is unreal. I learned so much and I know you will too. So, that's more than enough from me. Let's get on with the show. Hi Chris, and welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Ben.
Good morning. Well, it's afternoon. Come on, look at your time.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, afternoon.
No, brilliant, but it's so good to get you on. And I'm really excited about this because this is the first time I think we've actually talked about a topic / buzzword that everyone was panicking about, and there was a big fuss about it, and then nothing really changed, and everyone was like, oh, it's sort of back to normal. But then slowly it seems that over the last sort of weeks and months, people are starting to take notice again. So Chris, we're going to talk about a little bit about sort of GDPR today and sort of data-led marketing, and what went on with this GDPR apocalypse, or whatever they called it. Why did everyone panic, and has anything really changed in the way that marketing and businesses should operate?
Well, that's a lot of questions all in one, I think, Ben. Right, so what happened? There was a lot of overreaction. I think if you looked at your inbox for about 2 weeks before May the 25th, you saw a flurry of emails coming out from people who had your contact details, asking you for consent to stay on their database. Now, clearly, from my expectation, 70 or 80% of those were either illegal or they were totally unnecessary. And by sending them out, those clients would have lost a significant proportion of their client database. And the reason for this, they just overreacted. They didn't look at the regulations as a whole. They didn't understand that there were 6 legal bases for holding people's personal information, and frankly, did the wrong thing. There were other companies that actually had been hoovering up details and were hoping that they would add your details into their marketing newsletter around May the 25th, and were hoping to add customers to their database with consent.
Is that because sort of like the price of all this data just sort of dropped through the floor, and it was a case of, look, if we buy all this data for cheap and we can use it while we technically legally can, with my inverted commas, to try and just get more people to sign up because they know that they're going to lose a significant portion? Is that sort of what happened?
Absolutely. We've been seeing the price of data going down significantly in the lead up to May the 25th. Now, I have a theory here. I believe that fraud will increase as a side effect of GDPR. I think some will disagree with me, but our personal data is out there. If someone can't make money by selling it for profit, then maybe what they will do is offer it to fraudsters to use it for fraudulent purposes.
And now, how does that really affect everyday small business? Because I can understand that as individuals, there could potentially be some fraud against you because your details have been in the ether, and everything, you can find anything about anyone on the internet these days.
Yes, you can. Yeah.
But how does that actually affect local businesses and small businesses, medium, even big businesses? Does GDPR really matter? Has it changed anything? That's what I really want to get down to. Has it changed anything? What is different now to what it was before May 25th? Has anything really different? Is it just the size that email databases have just shrunk, and that seems like it's the only thing that's really changed?
No, things have already changed. But GDPR, like health and safety, is a decade-long or longer project. This is we're going to have to change our mindsets. Our personal data has a value, and it's been undervalued or devalued for many, many years. So this is actually, GDPR is the first set of regulations that will come along that, frankly, catches up. The electronic age has meant that we are able to share data more freely, more easily, and regulations about how we do it, why we do it, what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do, frankly, hasn't been in place. So, GDPR is the one that's been on people's lips recently. We have Data Protection Act 2018. We have e-privacy coming along in 18 months to 2 years' time. This is a totally new world we are entering. We're entering a world now where, I'm fed up with my personal data being sold for profit. If it is going to be sold for profit, I want a piece of that profit. And I think, when we look back in a decade's time, back to now, everyone will recognize this was a fantastic first step in redressing the balance and saying, individuals should have control over their personal data, who has it, who uses it, and for how long they're allowed to use it. And even people I'm working with, we're looking at personal strong boxes that sit in the internet that hold the personal data, and you choose who has access to that data. So, GDPR, while it creates a lot of work for businesses initially, I think it's the start of this massive new change. And some of the obvious changes already are newsletters. You'll get an email newsletter, and before May 25th, if you try to unsubscribe, one of two things would happen. Either it would ask you for the email address to which they've already sent it, or they would take you to a login page where you'd have to remember a password which you've never used in the last 5 years to unsubscribe. So if you did get to put your email address in and you got to your unsubscribe page, it was so convoluted and difficult, you didn't know if you were actually unsubscribing or not. Now, since May the 25th, I've seen a significant number of companies, and they're usually they're the companies I would say are the ones who are probably honest, straightforward, and reasonable companies. Once you say unsubscribe to a newsletter, it says, sorry to see you go, and that's it. You are unsubscribed immediately. You know that they understand the regulations. I'm still seeing a small percentage of companies that still take you to a login page or ask you for the email address or take you to a preference page, which is not acceptable under this regulation. So there is a positive thing. Most companies now, when you say, no, I don't want to receive your newsletter, their no is being accepted as no, and you're unsubscribed immediately. The other area I'm seeing an immediate effect is, have you ever bought something from a shop and been offered an electronic receipt?
Yeah, all the time now.
So what would happen is, and I ask people in a lot of the workshops we run, who gives their email address, and it's often a 50-50 split. It's a 30-30-30 split, because some say I never give my email address, some say sometimes, and a number say I don't have a problem with it. Now, what retail companies have typically done, they've taken that email address, and as you and I know, immediately it's been added to a marketing database as well as sending you the receipt. Now, under GDPR, that is not acceptable. You have to give explicit permission for it to be used to be put on a database. And I challenge retailers again and again, what are you going to do with that email address? Because as a relatively small business, I like electronic receipts because it goes straight into my finance platform and I don't have to worry about paper. But what I do not want to do, unless I've given explicit permission for that, is for my email address to be used for any other purpose than sending me the electronic receipt. Now, these companies have had it in their power, their choice, to send the receipt and immediately delete the email if they wanted to. And it's only this regulation that has now forced them to do that. So I'm seeing an increasing number of retailers now sending you the receipt and asking you, would you also like your details to be added to our marketing database? So you have a choice. You can give consent. So there are little changes already, I think, that are very positive ones.
And I can see there's a huge amount of positives, especially from the consumer end, and you see sort of the fact that your data is now how the amount of reduced spam I've got in there. I mean, there were a couple of emails that I seemed to be locked into, and every time can't remember ever logging into this website, but every time I tried to unsubscribe, it took me to a login page. I was like, I don't even remember having a flipping account for this thing, and I couldn't unsubscribe from the email. So from a user perspective, I understand the huge benefits that GDPR can bring, and I think that example you used at the end with the electronic receipts, and I think it's that case of business necessarily didn't always operate ethically before, and
Correct.
Now almost you have to put legislation in there to force people to be ethical, which isn't never right, but sometimes that's just the way that business and laws are there to do these days. But
yeah, and GDPR is really important. It's the first piece of, a set of regulations that will help us catch up in this electronic era about what data people can have, why they can have it, and how, and they must be transparent about the use they're going to put to it. So for me, it is a great start. But for me, GDPR sits within this whole piece called data protection. And it links back to trust. We've seen an erosion of trust in politicians, in politics, in large businesses over the past 20 to 30 years. We've inserted electronic communications in between people, because business people do business with people, and electronics is fantastic. We get a lot of huge benefits from it, but it's been abused in some ways. And what these set of regulations are doing, saying let's harness the web, let's get the benefits we can out of it, but there are ways in which it needs to be controlled, or the data that's passed over it needs to be controlled.
Yeah, no, it makes a huge amount of sense, but I do have sort of one sort of really burning question that sort of, as I make my notes throughout the podcast, I have a think about, how can I build on anything that you've said? And one thing that sort of sticks in my mind is, yes, this is an incredible bit of legislation to help users, but do businesses actually benefit? Can they get anything out of it? Because as a user, it's great. Yes, I'm giving less of my data away. But as a marketer, as a business owner, right, I go, shoot, I've got less contact details in my database. I've got less information, because for me, information is absolutely critical. The more I know about my customers, the people that have bought off me, the people that have inquired about my website, the better I can market to them, because I understand how they're doing it. So can businesses benefit from this new legislation, especially when you said there's so much more coming down the pipeline? I'm going to split this question into two parts. Can it benefit businesses, and how do they prepare for even more tighter legislation coming down the pipeline?
Okay, so information is knowledge, is power. Absolutely, it always has been the case. I've been working with a number of marketing teams. I was at the GDPR summit in London a few weeks ago, and this was one of the key topics. And marketing teams generally are the ones who we've seen struggling to get to terms with what GDPR actually means for them. And one of the positive things is that a lot of marketers say that they've been driven for many, many years to drive up the volume of communication with their clients or their potential customer base. A lot of business owners will partly value their business on their potential market base. So, we've got 150,000, 300,000, 1.2 million potential clients. Frankly, it's often rubbish. There is a huge database, but when you start to analyze that database, there is an email address. There's no other supporting data. The customer is already telling you they have no interest in engaging with you, are very unlikely to accept a cross-sell or an upsell, because simply they just don't listen to you because they don't want to. So even with companies that have been in this situation, we've seen some of them save, tens of thousands of pounds on outbound marketing costs by looking critically at their marketing database, looking at the quality of those contacts, looking at the do they have the correct permission to hold that information. And some of those databases have frankly fallen by 70 and 80%. But the marketing teams that I've been working with have said it's been very refreshing to go into a board level meeting and start talking about campaigns where the response rates are 40%, 45, 48, 52% response rates. And of course, if you're starting to do this, it's easier to identify the things that have made a campaign perhaps be better than another or worse than another if you've got a bigger percentage difference. Because in the past, teams were looking at a 0.4% response rate, a 1% or a 1.3% response rate. Sometimes very difficult to understand what worked and what didn't work. So a number of key marketing directors are saying, actually, while it's been painful to go to the board and say, look, the database is going to shrink, it's going from quantity, it's now going to be a quality database where people have said, absolutely, I want to be in your database. I like the products and services you offer. I believe that you're trustworthy. And therefore, if you offer me products, I'm more likely to, or services, I'm more likely to take them up. And it's a much more positive relationship you can have with those customers. And frankly, why are you spending time trying to talk to 80% of your database when they've already given you the signs and the indications they're not interested? But unfortunately, boards of companies, in many cases, or the senior management teams, have driven marketing teams just to get bigger and bigger outbound numbers.
Well, yeah, it was argue that from their point of view, it's a numbers game, wasn't it? It's like you're contacting more people. Again, same thing with sales, isn't it? The more people you're contacting, surely you should be getting more leads, more SQLs, more MQLs into your database. But actually, that's not always the case.
Absolutely. No. So the marketing teams, frankly, many of them are still struggling on how to get their heads around this, what do they need to do. But I'm clear with the colleagues I work with that if you can grasp this and you can take it forward, it's not about compliance. It is about compliance because you need to be compliant. But there is a much bigger positive side to this. You'll better engagement, better response rates, and you're working with the people who want to be engaging with you. Now, the other thing we have found more broadly in businesses, by looking at a business through the lens, what I call the lens of GDPR, you're looking across the silos of the business. Because most businesses, even medium-sized businesses, there will be an operations team, a sales team, a marketing team. You'll have some sort of technical support team, maybe. You'll have an implementation team, a service team, and even in relatively small businesses, people work in their own silos. And everyone's working hard. No business is easy these days. And you're so busy doing the day-to-day stuff, it's very difficult for people to step out of their own day-to-day role and get perspective. And sometimes a third party can bring perspective. Now, if it's from a GDPR perspective, what we often do is give people a broad awareness of what GDPR is. And a lot of people have made huge mistakes, like just assuming it's about consent. It's much more than consent. But once people have got this big picture about GDPR, and then we go in and what we do data mapping, looking at the personal data that is held by the business and look at how it's used through the business. That personal data will come in through a website. It will come in from a salesperson. It could come in from an event run by the marketing team. They will do some processing with it. It'll go onto a database or multiple databases. Someone else processes it. This data flows across many silos in the business. It may eventually go into the customer service team. So when we look at it, the business from this perspective, we find many, many opportunities for the business to look at improving some of the processes they have. Because what we found is many businesses have, over the years, morphed and changed as their customer base has changed. They've added more processes. They've got processes on top of processes, sticking plasters all over their business, and they're very inefficient. And actually, what GDPR data mapping does, it brings those to the surface straight away, very clearly, right in focus. Oh, why are we doing that? And it helps us allow the customer to ask the question, why are we doing it that way? And often is, well, that's just how we do it. Well, now we can challenge and say, if we could improve that process, it means that we can become more efficient. And actually, the costs of becoming GDPR compliant can often be offset by those efficiency savings. So I'll just give you an example. You asked about small businesses. One small business, by doing the data mapping, we found that they were spending an administration business was spending 4 days a month processing invoices for one service they offer, and they weren't aware it could be automated. Now, the automation will cost about £3,000, but from then on, there's a monthly recurring benefit, and the return on investment was 6 months. And now that once they freed up that resource can be then applied to doing more business development, improving their customer relationships, doing better marketing. What could a small business of 5 people do by getting back 20% of one person's time and putting it back into the things you've always wanted to do, but always complain you don't have the time to do?
Yeah, no, that makes a huge amount of sense, doesn't it? I mean, when you think about it from that side, actually we've been talking in marketing for still quite a long time, but actually it's all about it's not about the size of your Ujo What's It, it's how you use it. And it's a look at the same, your data, your list size, your advertising spend. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to have an incredibly huge list of 3 million database or subscribers and stuff, but it's actually about how you use it. And I found a huge mistake that I thought that companies were making after this. I've had so many companies email me and ask me to sign up to more communication from them when it just seemed completely unnecessary, because by purchasing their product, they could already talk to me about a huge amount of stuff, and then instead they're asking me to sign up to this new privacy policy, and it was just like, what are you trying to achieve by this? But you're out sort of losing my data completely, and it seemed crazy. Was that one of the biggest mistakes though that companies were making around GDPR, and just trying to say we need everyone to have marketing consent, when actually, because you said earlier, there are 6 different levels, and if I've bought a product from you, you're allowed to contact me because I've obviously got some sort of interest in your business and your company already. I don't need to necessarily be subscribed to absolutely everything.
There are some details and some finite, very specific things in the rules, but essentially, we are under GDPR. There are the legal basis for holding people's data. Now, many organizations only picked up the fact that it's about consent. Consent is a mechanism for gaining permission. Having a contract is a mechanism for gaining permission to hold people's data. A legitimate interest is a way of being able to say I have permission to hold people's data. So, the key thing about GDPR is, can you show that you have got permission to hold the data for a particular purpose, and have you communicated that openly to the person whose data that is? It's as simple as that. Have you been open, clear, and transparent about the purpose for which the data is being held and for how long you're going to hold it? That's what I talk about in the workshops I run. And so, unfortunately, many businesses in the run-up, they've done nothing. Don't forget, May the 25th, 2018 was the legal enforcement date of GDPR. It was in law, in place 2 years before. It was the second birthday. So people had 2 years to get themselves ready and implement it. And frankly, everyone was late.
Yeah.
Everyone was putting it off. We saw the big. We still think there is most businesses have not done enough to demonstrate they are working effectively towards compliance. But we did see a spike after Christmas. People have been home. Business owners have been putting it off, looking at their 2018 plan, and suddenly went, oh, yeah, that GDPR stuff. Yeah, I do need to start looking at that now. And everyone who had skills were frankly just absorbed 100% in trying to help people. And we had calls a week to go before May 25th from major large branded companies saying, help, we have no one, we know nothing. Can you make us compliant but in 7 days' time?
Absolutely love that.
Absolutely crazy, But people did. I think in the panic, some people looked at particular elements, and consent was a big one. People thought, I've got to go out and get consent. If you already had a legitimate interest for maintaining contact with customers, use it. If you already had contractual relationships with clients, use it. If you'd already had what's called a soft opt-in approach, then, carry on. But people overreacted and say, that flurry of emails you saw 2 weeks before May the 25th, it was just because people had cherry-picked things in the regulation and made mistakes. And we had I've worked with a charity who made a mistake, and again, against advice, went out and went for consent for some of their donors, and when they already had a legitimate interest for continuing. So obviously they made a huge mistake. Yeah,
because then they lose a huge portion of their database just because they haven't replied to that email. They've now potentially lost that data when it was perfectly good anyway, because there was the right legal basis was already there.
Absolutely, and we've got boards of directors who are saying to their senior management teams, yeah, just go and get consent. That's all GDPR means, and that is an important. Getting permission through one of those legal bases is absolutely vital. But it's about looking at your cyber security as well. It's no good understanding the personal data you hold, mapping which systems it sits on, making sure those systems and those companies whose systems you're using are GDPR compliant, and looking at who in your business uses and accesses that data. That's what GDPR is about. It's like, minimize the amount of personal data you hold to only the stuff you need. Make sure you don't have it on too many systems. Keep it on the bare minimum number of systems that you use. and make sure they're compliant, and reduce the number of people who access that data to the bare minimum. Once you do that, you're doing your risk management piece. Now, beyond that, think about it. It's about like putting all of your jewels in the one room in your house. What you then do is say, great, everything's all together now. It's great. It's in a safe in the middle of the main room. And then you go out and you leave the front door wide open, the back door and all the windows wide open. And this is the other thing about GDPR. It's not just about the data. What data you have, do you have the permission? But you must see, like everyone else sees, the amount of breaches that are happening through mistakes within organizations, often human errors, but also the amount of attacks that are happening on businesses. And this is happening again and again, and I can talk more about that if it's something you're interested in. But, we're seeing most companies saying, and they've outsourced their IT, whether they've outsourced their IT or they've got an internal IT department, we don't see much difference, and they often outsource their websites. We're finding that when we go and do what we call an independent breach assessment, we look at the vulnerabilities of that IT infrastructure, that web platform. Companies generally say, yeah, we're really good, or we're really confident in our IT supplier and our web provider. We're good or very good is what most people will say. As you can imagine, most people won't say they're poor already. We get one or two, but not many. And when we go in and do this totally independent assessment of their cybersecurity, since September, I would say we've just under 5 is the average. It's just under 5. We've only seen 1 or 2 6s and 1 or 2 8s out of 10. It's appalling. And we can sit outside people's offices and log on to their main database through their Wi-Fi enabled printer, because that's not been secured. So, yes, you have to understand the data you have. You have to understand what systems it sits in and are they compliant, minimize the number of your staff who use this data, but also you've got to look at the cyber security as well. So that's why GDPR is very good, because actually is forcing us now to actually start to do some of the things that we should have been doing anyway. And I liken this to the fact that most companies know that IT is very, very important. We struggle if it doesn't work for a few hours, if our emails are down. Okay, but actually, most companies are not investing the amount of money they need to in making sure their IT is secure and safe from cyber threats. And I'm saying to most boards, you have to put more money into your underlying IT security and infrastructure than you have ever before. It's not important now. It is absolutely mission critical.
Yeah.
And cyber attackers will sit inside that IT infrastructure for many, many, many months, watching and listening and collecting data, collecting personal data. And then they will use it against you. And we're seeing, again, so many companies having paid invoices of around £5,000 week in, week out, because cyber attackers have been inside their infrastructure, listening, watching, waiting, getting intelligence, and when they strike, and someone pays an invoice they shouldn't have.
And I think it's amazing, actually, the level of actually, once you start, it's almost like you start reading around a subject, and it's one little bit of legislation. Well, I say it's a reasonable bit of legislation. It's not a little bit, but this one bit of legislation has so many potential knock-on effects, and people look at things in such minute details without actually looking at that bigger picture. And even this conversation is really opening my eyes, actually, to the potential and actually how GDPR is helping to make businesses more ethical and more secure. So actually just help people, businesses use their data more ethically and hold it securely. So actually, you know what? This is how it can bet GDPR and actually improves the data of businesses and makes them hold it more securely, which means actually they get a better marketing return on this stuff. And it's actually thinking long term. Okay, you're saying going, panic, we have to get consent from everyone. Because I know America was probably the worst one, because they jumped on the GDPR bandwagon so late because they suddenly realised, oh shoot, probably a quarter of our audience is in Europe, or maybe a third, a half. And I saw so many people from large companies going, I've had to cull like half my database, I've had to cull like hundreds of thousands of people. And he was just like, whoa, you guys, again, maybe it was just me, but it seemed like it was almost that typical American overreaction, because they got on something really late and they panicked about all this consent stuff you said earlier, when actually because they didn't look at it until late, it was like a panic mode, and that's what a lot of companies did. They entered panic mode really quickly.
GDPR is not about panic. What the UK regulator has said is, look, it's about having a process. It's about putting in place a system that means that you understand the personal data you hold. You understand why you're holding it. You've been open, clear, and transparent with the person why you're holding it. If you don't have any of those, get rid of it, because it's a risk that you don't need to carry. And once you've done that, and in the process of doing that, you will get the efficiency benefits, you'll get the security benefits, which we just talked about. But the key thing is, it's a process. You can't, most businesses, and you mentioned small, medium-sized businesses, it's about being proportionate as well. It's about taking the appropriate steps. A business needs to go through the data mapping exercise, understand the data they have. You get a risk plan. You say, these are number 1 risks, these are number 2 risks, these are number 3, and you start working through the biggest risks first. And it may take a business 12 months to go through the priority 1 and the priority 2 risks. But what the regulator wants to see is you have a plan. You can only demonstrate a plan if you know your starting point, which is your data map. You cannot put in place these privacy notices on websites and for them to be accurate and reflect the business without doing a data map first. And unfortunately, we've seen some of our legal profession actually just giving privacy statements, privacy notices to clients. And actually, when we come in behind them, we actually find that there has been no data map. So actually, the privacy notice is not delivering what it should do for the client, and it has to be rewritten. So the key thing always is know the personal data you process as a business. Only hold the data you need to hold and you have a legal basis to hold. Keep it on as small a number of systems as possible. And systems, I include paper, because sometimes it's more appropriate to keep things on paper still. Minimize the number of your staff or subcontractors that have that data. And then you need to keep it secure. So again, it's building blocks, and future regulation will build on what GDPR says. So there's Data Protection 2018, which we've said that's being pushed through Parliament now, and there's elements of that. There's something called PECR, PECR regulation that's been around for almost 20 years. That's the Electronic Communications Act. That's being updated as well. So you'll see e-privacy coming along in 18 months to 2 years. So, many businesses some businesses have said, nothing happened after May 25th. And they likened it to the year 2000.
Millennium bug.
The millennium bug. Now, I worked in telecoms and IT, and the reason that was a bit of an anticlimax was we worked for 18 months to 2 years before testing, updating software to make sure that there were as minimum number of issues to do with clocks rolling over on that millennium date. And that's why, to many people, it was an anticlimax. It was a waste of time. It wasn't. The IT and telecom industry worked hard over the 18 months before to get the whole world in a position where there weren't many major issues. So unfortunately, there are business owners out there who have simply said, there's one of two things. They've either said, oh, look, it's like the year 2000. We were right all along, gone, nothing's happened. Well, the regulator and fines and penalties under the new regulations probably are going to start hitting from September onwards. So just watch this space. Owners who have made that decision to ignore the regulation will increasingly see allied industries, their competitors getting hit, and they will wake up and they will realize they have to do something. We've also seen some business owners, for a medium size to a large company, who may have spent, a day or two, engage a solicitor, put a privacy notice in place, a few other little bits. They spent a couple of days. For a good-sized company that is a complex business, it will take longer than that to do all of those checks. So they're frankly fooling themselves into believing they have done enough to be compliant. And we're going to see some of those fall foul of the regulations, or they'll wake up and say, well, perhaps we haven't done enough. So, there are some great companies we've been working with who have done a huge amount. They've had their independent IT assessments. They've plugged the holes. Some of them have gone out to retender for new IT and website providers because, frankly, the old ones were not up to scratch. It's a great opportunity then to save money on your IT and your website costs. And we've got companies from marketing departments embracing this and saying, right, yeah, okay, isn't it more exciting? Don't we get better satisfaction when we're talking about much higher response rates? We're engaging in more campaigns with the people who really want to listen to what we've got to say, what we've got to offer. So, it's a multi-track. We've got people at one end of the spectrum who are, embracing it from a compliance perspective and from a new opportunity. How can we use this now to better engage with clients? To people down the other end who, frankly, have done nothing. And there's the whole spectrum in between.
I think that's it's just fascinating. I'm making so many notes, and this is exactly why I bring on people like you and all the other guests I've brought on the podcast, because I'm making so many notes here thinking, shoot, there's some of these things that I potentially need to think about, and I know there are always different ways in which I can benefit, and I think it's great actually when you take that broader approach to legislation and actually just look from a really strategic point of view. And I think the sort of the insight you provided has been sort of second to none, really. I've scribbled like all my whole A4 page, loads of different notes I need to go away and maybe think more big picture about. And I know everyone else listening will have had the same thing. So thanks so much for coming on today, Chris. It's been really incredibly insightful.
Good. Well, I hope so. So businesses have just got to grasp this. This is not going to go away. This is the start of the new world of data and the power of data and us having control of our own data. And, ultimately, if we're looking at the way the web has developed, we want to trust the suppliers that we give our data to. And I wouldn't bet against the fact that some of the people that we share our data with will end up giving us commission back for the use of our data. That's an interesting concept for marketers to grapple with. I'd be more than happy to speak to agree with that or disagree with that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think all the contact details for Chris are obviously going to be put in the show notes. If you have any other questions, please do get in touch. I think we'd leave on the point that essentially this is the end of the beginning, and it's not the end of the story. It's literally this is like the prologue. This is the intro, and we've got to the end of the intro, and we're like, okay, now we're going to be ramping things up again. Now we get into the real nitty gritty of the story, and I absolutely love that idea. But Chris, before I let you go, I've got to ask you the one question I ask every guest that I get on the show, and it's, apart from GDPR, which you obviously love, and data and stuff, is what are the marketing buzzwords are you absolutely loving or hating right now? What is absolutely grinding your gears and you're like, I hate it when people use this term? Or what are you like, actually, you know what, I think this could be the next big thing and I actually use this term a lot myself. What are some of your thoughts around that?
I think what is really, really important is single customer view, particularly for complex businesses, businesses working across multiple verticals with the same clients. What does that mean? 10 years ago, large companies tried to implement tools and systems to give their business a single view of what their customer engagements were like, and most of them failed. They were too expensive, took too long to implement. The IT world has changed massively in the last 5 years. And I think, in fact, some of my colleagues who are in the GDPR space, we believe that the only way in big complex businesses that you can ever implement real controls, real permission management is having a single customer view. Now, I'd certainly be interested to know what people think about a single customer view. Do they think it's can be a reality now, cost-effective reality? Can we live without it as we have done, or is it absolutely critical? And I think, along with single customer view, it's about being client-centric, and listening to what they say, they tell you in the data that you collect about them. And then, everyone's talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. We've been doing some of this on very small scale for quite some time. These are two buzzwords which crop up, and I certainly would like to know more about, what they actually mean in practice.
Yeah, no, absolutely, most definitely. I think on that note as well, you maybe check back to maybe episode 6 of the podcast where we had Elizabeth Clark come on and talk about machine learning, and is actually the top downloaded a podcast actually of the entire Marketing Buzzword one, so maybe that's something that people should check out as well. Anyway, before I get too sidetracked, thanks so much for coming on today, Chris. Honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've learned so much. I know everyone else has as well, so thank you once again for coming on.
No problem. Enjoy your day, Ben.
Honestly, I absolutely love episodes like this because I learned so much about these terms and how they can be used, and it was great to really get into, actually, because a lot of people talked about the negative side of GDPR and how it negatively affects your data, and it was really quite refreshing to actually hear some positive spin on it, maybe not spin, but some positive aspects to it, and actually how it works in the real world, and like how actually the marketing teams and business can benefit from this new legislation. And actually, look, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to come, so I think it's absolutely fascinating, and I can't wait to to hear your feedback about this. And again, if you have any feedback about the Marketing Buzzword project in general, the podcast, the book, and the blog stuff, if you are interested in any of that, please do get in touch with me and let me know. I'm always want to make this keep moving this project and this podcast forward. If there's anything you want to hear more of or less of, please do let me know. And please pre-order a copy of the book Marketing Buzzword to Marketing Authority, or if you can't afford that, please do share it. Honestly, it means an absolutely massive amount to me, and actually really helps kick this podcast onto another level. Thank you so much for listening, and back on Thursday with another bite-sized buzzword. Goodbye.
This podcast is part of the You Are the Media Network.